All right, I guess we'll get underway and allow people to continue to trickle in as we get going. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar featuring FCM's Green Municipal Fund. My name is Jacob Gorenkoff, and I'm the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives with the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I am currently on in Ottawa is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And as all of you are joining us today from many places, near and far, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'm going to give you a brief run through of today's webinar technology. So today's webinar is in real time. You should now be able to see a title screen of today's presentation and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or through your telephone if you've chosen to dial in. As we're in webinar format, you're all muted. If you wish to ask questions, you may type them in the Q&A section on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation. We will end up addressing as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. We're also going to be launching a poll at some point during today's session. So when the poll is launched, it'll pop up on your screen, and all you have to do is select as many answers are applicable to you and then click submit to vote. So today we're going to be hearing from three wonderful people on FCM's Green Municipal Fund team. The first is Jen Arnfield, the Sustainable Affordable Housing Lead. Second is Benjamin Kozworski. Name is very difficult to pronounce, Ben. Advisor of Programs Outreach. And the third person is Lindsay Telfer, Manager of Capacity Development. Welcome, Jen, Benjamin, and Lindsay, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jacob, and thanks everyone for joining. We're really excited to be here today to talk about some opportunities and benefits related to doing energy efficient retrofits. So today we're going to walk through a high level of some research on some of the opportunities and benefits, talk to you about some case studies, give some thoughts on how to get started, and then talk about how our funding can help. I led the design of our Sustainable Affordable Housing Program in the fall of 2019 and the winter of 2020. That process involved a lot of engagement with the sector, and it also involved quite a bit of research around the challenges and opportunities in the community housing sector, particularly as it relates to energy efficient design and implementation. And so this first section in the landscape scan, I'm going to share with you some of the findings from that initial research that we did that actually helped shape the Sustainable Affordable Housing Program that's available today. So let's dive into it. All right. So we started with taking a look at the buildings, and that's what we're going to do here today as well. Something that I do want to caveat in terms of the data that's up here, this research and work was done in 2019, and in some cases was using data sources from a little bit before that. So this isn't necessarily reflective of the impact of the National Housing Strategy and what that may have done to some of the numbers. So I did want to just kind of set that context at the outset. But if you look at the age of the stock, at least as of a couple of years ago, and it won't have changed that much in the last couple of years, the vast majority, over 90% of the stock is over 25 years old. And even 44% of it is actually over 40 years old. And these the two colors in green really reflect periods of federal investment and then somewhat of a lack thereof before the National Housing Strategy between 1994 and 2017. The majority of the units in the sector are in multi-unit residential buildings. However, there are a significant number of row houses, semi-detached, and single-detached houses in the sector as well. I will note that for the recently built buildings, that blue 8% that was built after 1994, they have tended to be built above the National Energy Code for Buildings or the National Building Code. And that's a combination of things there. It was typically perhaps a condition of the funding, and it also is demonstrative of some of the innovation and leadership that the sector has shown in terms of energy efficient building in the last couple of decades. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of kind of the unit distribution across the country and a little bit of a sense of the state of repair. There are over 600,000 units across the country. Over half of them are owned by nonprofit organizations. And then just under the other half are owned by either municipalities, provinces, or territories. A large concentration of the units are in Ontario and Quebec. And the Stats Canada census in 2016 showed the percentage of non-market units in need of major repairs. So that's the color coding on the map. It shows really significant opportunity for retrofits there. The yellow reflects 5 to 9% in significant need of repair. The orange is getting to the 10 to 19%. And then the red colors that you see in a couple of the territories, there's over 20% of the stock was in need of major repair. So it certainly shows some great opportunity across the country in terms of retrofits. Next slide, please. So in addition to the age of the building and the general state of repair, energy use intensity of the building is another factor to consider in terms of the need for retrofit. We don't have national data on this point, but the BC Nonprofit Housing Association does have provincial data from 2010, which is what's on this slide here. And this shows the average annual TUI, or the total energy use intensity, for nonprofit buildings in comparison to the BC average building. A TUI, that total energy use intensity, tells us the total energy consumed in a building, including the natural gas and electricity, in a year based on the building's square footage. For reference, a typical building built to today's standards would have a TUI of around 200. So as you can see, nonprofit apartments and single detached houses have significant opportunities to find efficiencies, which would decrease energy use and energy costs overall. So another important consideration in the context of inefficient and older housing is that of energy poverty, which is qualitatively defined as the experience of households that struggle with meeting their home energy needs, which would typically include electricity and home heating fuels. There's currently no formal and official definition for energy poverty in Canada. However, CUSP, the Canadian Urban Sustainability Practitioners Network, whose research we have included in this presentation, they've measured energy poverty as a household paying 6% or more of their after-tax income on energy. And for reference, most households in Canada pay on average 3% of their after-tax income on energy. So this measure reflects at least twice the national average. I think it's particularly interesting to look at this definition in comparison to that of core housing need, which I'm sure is a definition maybe some more of you on this call would be familiar with. But as a refresher, a household in core housing is in core housing need when housing is inadequate, which means it's in need of major repairs, or if it's unsuitable and without adequate bedrooms, or is unaffordable. That's when shelter costs more than 30% of the total householding. Something notable about that affordability criteria is it only considers the costs of rent or mortgage payments, so it doesn't actually account for utilities or other costs of housing, such as transportation. As you can imagine, many of the impacts of core housing need and energy poverty are actually the same. Particularly in terms of the need to choose between paying for shelter or energy and other essentials like groceries, and the mental health impacts associated with these types of situations and choices. There's also some energy-specific impacts to health and well-being associated with energy poverty, but these also may occur for those in core housing need, where the housing falls into the category of inadequate or in need of major repair. So across Canada, approximately 20% of households are in energy poverty, while about 13% are in core housing need. And energy poverty and core housing need both disproportionately impact marginalized populations, including lone parent households, particularly those led by women, as well as Indigenous and recent immigrant households. And while the community housing sector is a key solution in addressing core housing need in Canada, and it is always, I know, interested in ensuring affordability for the people that you serve, there does remain some opportunity for the sector to address energy poverty. These stats on this slide are as of 2016. 45% of the households living in non-market housing were paying for their utilities. And overall, for those living in non-market housing, about 17% of households were living in energy poverty, meaning they were paying more than 6% of their after-tax income on utilities. 9% of households in non-market housing were paying more than 10% of their income, and 5% of households in non-market housing were paying more than 15% of their after-tax income on energy and heating. This last chart there, the light green, considers those two factors together. So those living in non-market housing and paying for their utilities while being in energy poverty. And when you put those things together, we're at about 37% of households. So energy retrofits present a great opportunity to make an impact in affordability in this housing overall. And energy retrofits also contribute to Canada's climate goals. We know this is an innovative sector, and there's already some really fantastic examples, some of which you're going to see in the case studies, of projects that have significantly reduced their carbon footprint. But if Canada is going to meet its climate goals of reducing GHG emissions by 40% by 2030, many more buildings across the country will need to be retrofit, as 18% of Canada's emissions come from building energy use. And considering the age and state of some of the existing buildings in this sector, there's really great opportunity here to have a positive impact. Next, please. So this provides a little bit of a summary of what we just went through in terms of what some of the benefits are. Obviously, benefits in terms of the environment and the sector kind of leading the way, but there's also incredible benefits to you as a provider in completing energy retrofits. There's great opportunities to reduce operating and maintenance costs of the building, where deep energy retrofits can result in 40 to 60% of savings in energy costs. These savings could be reinvested in the portfolio or contribute to your affordability goals. And in some cases, these savings could support lifting residents out of energy poverty. And beyond cost savings, energy retrofits can be combined with other planned upgrades in your asset management plans and can provide an opportunity to increase the resilience of your building in a changing climate. These projects are also a way to improve the health and well-being of your residents, for example, through improved air quality, or by providing an option for cooling, the lack of which is becoming more and more of a health risk in a warming climate. So I'm now going to pass it over to Lindsay, who will provide us some inspiration in the form of case studies.
Thanks, Jen. So let's dive in and actually see a few examples of how housing providers have responded to this dual challenge. As we started to do a deeper dive into understanding the challenges of energy poverty across the country, we started to ask ourselves, how could supporting retrofits in Canada's affordable housing sector also help alleviate the intensive pressures caused by rising energy and utility costs? It strikes me a little bit that some of the statistics that Jen shared earlier, 17%, and I believe you said that was in 2016. We all know since 2016 what the cost of energy has in our own and many of our own utility bills has done. And so I can only imagine that number has escalated in the last 5 years. But in other words, we really wanted to know if retrofits could be part of the solution for those 17, 20% of non-market housing residents who are in energy poverty. The answer is both yes, we have some of those case studies, and we need more of those case studies. So I think there's a lot of great potential for us to advance some innovative work in this area specifically. Let's start our little tour in Canada, in Ottawa. With a portfolio of units from the 60s and 70s, Ottawa's community housing President Avenue site was at the tipping point of the life cycle renewal. Their building exteriors were in need of repairs, heating and energy systems were outdated, and residents who were paying their own utility costs were struggling to make these monthly bills. So they started to ask themselves, how could they not just keep their building standing, but instead thriving along with their residents into the future? The answer for them was a complete building envelope upgrade, including the installation of 9 foot by 20 foot prefabricated panels. These panels formed an airtight shell in the roof of the townhouses. This new building envelope greatly reduces the amount of energy that was required to heat and cool the building. The natural gas furnace and domestic hot water units were replaced with electric heat pumps. And to make the project net zero greenhouse gas emissions, a 35 kilowatt solar rooftop array was installed on the south facing portion of the roof. The project, once complete, and it's actually nearing completion now, will result in an annual GHG reduction of 17 tons annually. That's about 4.25 tons per unit. From the beginning of this exploration, the residents at Ottawa Community Housing's President Avenue project were engaged. The support for the initiative was critical to success. They were, as with all of our case studies today, in their homes throughout their nations. Before hitting go, Ottawa Community Housing partnered with NRCan to explore the feasibility of the project. Together, they did an energy model to ensure that the project would in fact meet net zero. NRCan also supplied some funding for the project execution. Ottawa Community Housing conducted building condition inspections to gain some deeper knowledge on the status of the building structures and foundations. They also wanted to assess any surprises that they might uncover as they began the actual retrofit work. In other words, they didn't go into the retrofit blind. They did their research, they engaged their residents, and they built support for the project. It doesn't mean that it was all smooth sailing, though. No one loves living in construction zones. You can ask Ben and I, we both live in construction zones right now. But now that the pilot is nearing completion, on Victoria Day long weekend, they turned the AC units on for the very first time in these units. And for many of the residents who were very much experiencing the pains of the rising utility costs, their first utility payment-free month is expected this month. So a big moment of celebration for this project. And I'm hoping if we go back and talk to some of those residents, they'll say it was worth it and worth the investment. Let's head westward and explore a similar project in Edmonton. And similarly, the Sundance Housing Cooperative also went to prefabricated walls for their retrofit of their 1970s townhomes in the heart of Edmonton's River Valley. They added panels, insulation, and a new roof with barrier-wrapped ceilings. Once complete, their project is estimated to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 276 tons across the 59 units that are slated for renovation. That's similar to Presland, is around 4.5 tons per unit. This reduction is anticipated while concurrently increasing services, again, like AC units that were not provided pre-retrofit. In deciding what type of retrofit they wanted to complete here, the co-op embarked on a feasibility study and mapped out 3 different scenarios for them to consider. The first was just to maintain status quo. A second was to bring the existing buildings up to current code. And the third was a deep energy reduction retrofit. Energy efficiency has always been a priority for the co-op, and the deep energy retrofit was going to get them closer to their net zero goal. In addition to the prefabricated panels, the retrofit will transition the units to full electricity by adding air source heat pumps, heat recovery ventilators, and converting water heating from gas to electric. For those of you who know carbon grids, in Alberta is a high carbon grid. This type of electrification can actually end up increasing greenhouse gas emissions for a project, especially if your electricity is coming from high carbon fuels such as coal. To offset this reality, it was important from a climate perspective to add the on-site electricity generation. With the addition of solar arrays, the co-op's net zero goal came within striking distance. When finished, the Sundance solar units are anticipated to produce up to 78% of the post-retrofit electrical needs. To get to this point, it was essential to bring the co-op members, their residents, along in the journey. At least 15 membership workshops have been held, and a newsletter was created to provide ongoing and continuous updates to residents throughout the project. As with Breslin and Ottawa, residents were remaining in-house for the duration of the renovation. With a total cost of just under $11 million, we're averaging about $174,000 per unit. Members currently pay their own gas and power, which will now actually be paid through the co-op itself. Sundance cooperative members and residents are excited to share their lessons learned to the rest of the country to help with replication. They believe it's possible and we can get these results. Heading back east for a final case study, I want to explore a little bit of a different case study than the first two. Our final example is examining a series of Toronto community housing buildings. Most of Toronto's 2,200 community housing buildings were built in the 50s and 60s and are in dire need of renovations. In this project, Toronto Community Housing Corporation partnered with the Atmospherics Fund on a multi-year project to retrofit 7 community housing buildings. The project aimed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% and utility costs by 20%. Again, as you'll see a trend in these case studies, early engagement of residents was critical for the project's success. Design charrettes involved residents and project partners and stakeholders and industry experts. Significant research, including tenant surveys and on-site testing, informed the project. Building assessments revealed that inadequate ventilation systems produced airflows more than 40% below current building code requirements, identifying important priorities in addition to the energy efficiency goals. On top of that, uncomfortably warm indoor temperatures due to oversized and poorly controlled boilers caused tenants to leave windows open during the winter, wasting precious energy. The project reduces utility costs across the suite of buildings by more than $500,000 per year, and greenhouse gas emissions by the equivalent of 963 tons. That's just about a ton per unit, and is expected to yield a 364% return on investment over the 10-year partnership span. On top of that, supply of fresh air has increased in some buildings up to 75 to 100%. Contrary to the first two case studies, in this example, most residents didn't actually pay their own utilities. But by investing in the buildings over the long term, owners will improve affordability and comfort for all residents. But the interesting part of this story is that the project went a step further to support its residents. Through a partnership with Building Up, a nonprofit organization that trains people facing employment barriers, the project hired 12 community members. The workers assisted with the installation and trained residents in proper thermostat use. So you could argue that there are two ways of tackling energy poverty: reducing utility costs and increasing employability. It's my understanding that several of those hired and trained through this project have gone on to continue work in the sector. So it can be, again, a win-win-win. But where do we start? These can seem like huge projects. They can seem like daunting projects. So we wanted to break down for you all today a couple of steps to get you started down this journey. In analyzing the case studies that we put before you today and understanding best practices across the sector, we've identified 6 steps for you to consider when thinking about undergoing an energy efficiency retrofit. I'm going to walk through these in each a little more detail and point you to where you can find additional information. As each of our case studies showed, there's important work to do before any actual renovation or improvement work on your property actually takes place. Take the time to engage your residents. As we saw in each of the case studies, this engagement may actually identify some other aligned and important priorities. Build the knowledge of your internal team and your residents alike. A great first step is to conduct a self-assessment to take a deeper look on your readiness. There are some great self-assessment tools out there that can help you identify gaps in readying for action on energy consumption. We're going to share a link in the chat of one of those tools. This specific tool is actually designed for the commercial sector, but in completing it, you'll be able to see really clear gaps and opportunities for some early stage priority setting. We also have some fantastic resources available on our FCM website, from building the business case for your board or management to tips and tools on how to plan and undertake an energy retrofit. And I'm super excited to announce, hot off the press, we just launched moments before we joined our webinar today, our new Sustainable Affordable Housing Resource Library. The link has been posted there in the chat, and we invite you to explore this fantastic resource where we've included some of the best of our FCM affordable housing resources alongside some stellar resources from across the sector. So do take some time and check that out. The second step along our way is to take some time to understand consumption patterns and trends in your building. We may not control the cost of energy, but we do control our consumption to some extent. A walkthrough energy assessment can help build this knowledge and can help get you ready for deeper audit programs. Identify how energy is being used. Consider doing a resident survey and find out how energy is actually used by your residents in each of your units. And also collect utility data over a multi-year period to get a sense of the trends. A friendly hint, often our utility bills do this for us and will include a comparison month by month over the last year. We also have an energy coach program that will help affordable housing providers initiate and plan energy efficiency retrofits and new builds. From project management and technical support to walk-through energy assessments and one-on-one coaching, our regional energy coaches can guide you through the process of identifying some of those opportunities and evaluating the feasibility of energy retrofits. They can demonstrate what technologies you may be able to leverage in your projects and provide insights on how to maximize the environmental impact of your project. They can also help support preparation of successful funding applications and give you tips and tools that they've picked up along the way. So again, there's some good links we're sharing in this section in the chat box and a link to our Regional Energy Coach program as well. Now that you've built your knowledge and expertise, it's time to start to go deeper and identify the opportunities and priorities for a potential retrofit. Remember, the Sundance Housing Project's case study, we discussed how they developed 3 scenarios to help them understand their options. This is a great model for anyone to consider. Map out your options, look at your scenarios, look at the return on investment across those scenarios, and start to see what makes the most sense. And in Preslands, they worked with NRCan and were able to model their retrofit scenarios to see what was actually going to be needed for them to get to that net zero. Often the best places to start are the planning processes that many of us already do. How many of you already do capital plans, building condition assessments, or asset management plans? Actually, let's find out. We're going to launch a poll. So my colleague Jacob here at CHRA is going to launch a poll for us. And we invite you to share with us whether you or clients that you work with currently complete any of the following. Please don't limit your response. Select each of the planning tools that you currently complete. Or if we've missed any, add in the chat. As you're responding, I'm just going to do a super quick description. A building condition assessment is going to give you an asset liability that you have in your buildings. It'll tell you the expected lifespan of building elements like boilers, furnaces, roofs, flooring, etc. An asset management plan will outline your management approach, your needs and timelines to maintain your existing infrastructure. A capital plan will allow you to plan proactively for the asset turnovers and replacements needed. And an energy assessment will help you identify which of these assets, when replaced, could improve energy performance and efficiency. All right, so let's end our polling here. And I'm impressed, over 90% of you are currently doing energy assessments and audits. So congratulations, you're well on your way. Also, I think all of the planning tools are widely used. And really, I think the best step is to include those energy efficiency goals within all of your planning mechanisms. By combining our sustainability and energy goals with these important planning documents, we can ensure that we have the plans to implement changes when opportunities arise. And finally, now that we've done all of this legwork, we can actually start planning for our retrofit. And here a whole new other journey begins. We here at FCM are here to help. And with that, I get to pass it over to my colleague, Ben, to share more information on our affordable housing program at the Green Municipal Fund. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks a lot, Lindsay, and thank you to everyone for being with us here today. I hope that you found some useful and interesting information from some of the statistics and facts that Jen was sharing, and some of the examples and procedures that Lindsay presented. If we've captured your imagination a little bit, I'm here to talk about some of the funding that's available through our program that can help you get started and keep moving through the processes of considering and then ultimately implementing retrofits to your existing housing portfolio. So let's take a look at the next slide. Our initiative is called the Sustainable Affordable Housing Program. It's a $300 million program that was funded by the Government of Canada to provide grants and loans to eligible nonprofit housing providers. So that's nonprofits, municipal housing corporations, and housing cooperatives to help improve energy efficiency and achieve broader goals. So it doesn't have to be focused on the energy, though that is really the core focus due to achieve energy upgrades among other quality improvements. Intended $2 million of loans. Yeah, just so you do have to submit an application and demonstrate the value of what you're doing and how it'll make a difference for your organization and for your residents. Another key piece of the program is capacity building. So the tools and resources that Lindsay described, including the Regional Energy Coach program, are funded through our capacity building envelope, which is really intended to be there as a set of resources to help you go about carrying out these exciting and interesting projects. Next slide. When considering a funding application to the program, we really do look at the triple bottom line. We look at shared objectives of what you achieve through your project across environmental, economic, and social goals. So for the environment, of course, we're looking for reductions in energy consumption and in GHG emissions. And in those three examples that we saw outstanding improvements in energy efficiency in the buildings, to the point where some of them are not even demanding any energy from the grid at all. And as we saw in the larger Toronto example, significant reductions in emissions because they just didn't need to run their boilers quite as much because the quality of air distribution in the building had improved. The economic gains speak for themselves. Lowering your utility costs saves money in the long term. It contributes to housing affordability and those twin goals of core housing need that Jen was describing, and also energy poverty, which affects, as she showed, 37% of the residents who pay for their own utilities. So the economic benefits are really a strong objective of this type of project that you might want to achieve. And our program is really here to help you get the startup capital that you need to achieve these types of benefits. For social improvements, of course, these projects improve the building quality. You saw the before and after pictures on some of those projects. They increase resident comfort, health, and quality of life. And in some ways give just pride of place. It's really great to live in a recently renovated, comfortable, highly livable environment. And so we need to acknowledge the social benefits that come about directly through retrofits, and then broader social benefits that come through community engagement and other things that may happen along the way. Building sector capacity, well, that's what we're up to today. Our goal is really to involve you in these discussions and learn from you and answer your questions and hopefully give you the confidence and the tools you need to move forward with the project. Next slide. So if you're considering our funding, in order to be eligible as a project, we really do look for outstanding performance gains. For retrofits, we're looking for a minimum of 25% reduction in energy consumption versus your current energy consumption. This aligns with the energy targets that are set by the CMHC co-investment fund. If you've heard of the co-investment fund, you'll know that they look for a minimum of 25% in energy gains. And our funding can actually be stacked with the co-investment funding to help you fund the majority of the different stages of project implementation, with the goal of achieving these really deep energy gains through a retrofit project. Our fund is also available to support new construction projects, and we set an outstanding target of 80 kilowatt hours per square meter, which we think is fairly representative of net zero energy or net zero energy ready. It's a really, really low energy consumption, about 60% better. If you remember in one of Jen's early slides, she said a typical new building will have about 200 kilowatt hours per square meter. So we're looking for buildings that are, you know, at half, less than half of a typical new construction, if you're considering a new construction project. For affordability, again, we're only open to nonprofit housing providers, cooperatives, and municipal housing providers. So we hope that you'll have a minimum standard of affordability where at least 30% of your units will be rented at less than 80% of the median market rent. And you can always get in touch with us or any of the regional energy coaches to find out more about these energy targets and how they can affect your project. We have funding available at key project stages, and the idea is that we have the right amount of funding at the right time to help you move through the project planning and implementation process. So at the outset, we have a planning grant, which is a really great grant available. It provides a small amount of upfront funding, which you can use to start with some of your community engagement, start setting goals, objectives for a project, identify your energy savings goals, identify some implementation partners like architects and engineers that you might be interested in working with. Do some of that community engagement, which is such an important piece of success in the examples that we've seen, where having residents on board and saying, this is what we'd like to see in our homes, it can really have an important role on setting the tone and the pace for the project that follows. If you have a fairly well set project plan, you might be interested in further funding for detailed studies of your building, where you hire those professionals who can come and assist you to get the real numbers and costs and benefits of the different pieces of your project, and really move through that project planning process that Lindsay described. We have two different types of funding available for the implementation of a retrofit. For pilot projects, we have a small amount of funding for those really rare and exceptional projects that lead the way for the rest of Canada. And it's really great to see through the fund. We've been operating for a year now. There are a few projects out there that are really intended to change the way we talk about energy efficiency. So for those few projects, we do have a limited amount of pilot project funding available, but the majority of projects will be interested in accessing our capital project funding, which is a combination of loan and grant that can help, in the case of retrofits, pay for up to 80% of the costs of your building retrofit, including energy and non-energy costs. So through these 4 stages of funding, we really intended to have a funding offer that's, as I said, the right amount at the right time to help you move through those stages of project implementation. Here is the details of the dollar amounts. I'll always encourage people to take a snapshot of the screen if you're interested in keeping this information. It's also available on our website and in our application guide, which is a really great resource that lays out exactly how the funding works. I'll just point out the dollar value. You know, at the planning grant stage, we can offer up to $25,000 to help do those initial activities. For studies, we can offer up to $175,000 as a matching grant, which is stackable with the CMHC Seed Fund, if you are aware of some of CMHC's programs. The pilot project funding, which is also stackable with the CMHC Innovation Fund. And then for retrofits and new construction projects, we can offer up to $10 million towards the capital costs of implementing an outstanding energy efficiency project. And if you're interested in learning more about that, you know, please do get in touch with me or anyone on staff here at FCM. We're really here to support you. Our funding is stackable with other federal, provincial, municipal, and private sources of funding. We generally don't place any restrictions on where else you might be getting funding from. You're able to connect GMF Sustainable Affordable Housing funding with whatever sources you have available to fully fund your project. We intend to provide flexible loan conditions. So if you do finance a capital project through our program, we really try to make it workable where the loan portion of the funding is not an excessive burden on your organization, where you can really manage to continue to provide affordability and benefit from the long-term savings of the energy efficiency, even as you pay for a portion of the upfront costs over time. We have regional energy coaches. Lindsay described them. They're a really great resource, and I encourage you to get in touch with your local regional energy coach to have a conversation about getting started with a project, or if you've already gotten started, moving forward to the next step. And of course, our team at FCM provides application advice and guidance. So don't hesitate to be in touch with us and say, we're thinking of doing something. What do we what is the, where do we think sitting in at the program side, and we'll be able to give you some advice and tips. And of course, the great tools and resources. Take a look at the chat. Jen provided a link to our resources page. So there are some really great resources available on our website. So the last thing I'd like to invite you to do is to get connected with us. Visit our website, fcm.ca/sustainable affordable housing. Subscribe to our newsletter or reach out to us by email. And we really look forward to hearing from you and learning about the things that you're doing. And we really appreciate you joining today. So please don't hesitate to put forward some questions. We look forward to having a discussion. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you to the three of you. So as Ben said, we're now going to be opening the floor to questions. If you haven't already, please type them in the Q&A panel on the bottom center of your screen whenever you're ready. So first question, per the intended no utilities payments by residents element of the Ottawa Community Housing Pilot, what means will be used to generate electricity in the absence of sunlight, and how will this be paid for?
Take a stab at answering that with a caveat that I'm going to answer a little bit generally. But generally, there's going to be on-site battery storage for times when sunlight is not hitting the solar panels. Now, that being said, even on cloudy days, you're still often generating electricity via those solar panels. They can actually collect the rays through through some cloud cover. So there certainly is some battery storage. And I believe in this case, they will be hooked up to the grid if at any point they're not generating enough. So they're not an off-grid building. So they are still connected to the grid. They feed into the grid when their solar panels are generating a ton of electricity, and they draw from the grid when they're not. And the solar contributions are balanced out across that generation. So that's a little bit of a general, I think a general answer, but hopefully that gets at some of that. Again, it's not off-grid. They're not off-grid living. They're connected to the grid. They feed into it. They can draw from it.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. Ben or Jen, did you want to hop in on that at all? Nope. Okay, just checking. Second question, Ben, I know that you mentioned this already, but we did get another question about it. So to reiterate, can this program be used to offset costs for new construction planned to start in 2022? And can this funding be stacked on top of other funds?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that. Absolutely. It's an application-based funding process. So if you have an eligible project, and you have the documentation that's needed to demonstrate exactly what the energy demand of your project will be, what the project parameters are, a fairly detailed set of documentations required to submit an application. But if you do have that documentation ready to go, you could submit an initial proposal to the program. We could take a look at your documents, and we could say whether or not the funding is a good fit. And then we'd put you into the application process. So we'd invite you to complete a formal application, and then you would potentially have a funding confirmation, hopefully ready to go for your 2022 construction project. There's still enough time now between now and the 2022 construction season to get a funding confirmation. It really depends on how much documentation you have, just to make sure that the project is really well evidenced in your submission. There are some other details about how our funding works. Really, it's flexible. It's there to help you do these types of projects. So I'd be happy to have a call with you and learn more about where you stand, and demonstrate to you the ways in which the funding could potentially be useful.
Maybe I'll just add a teeny bit in terms of our new build offer, because that obviously wasn't our focus today, but just in terms of the question of stackability, our new build offer in particular was really designed to be stackable. We cover up to 20% of the cost of a project, which is really to enable building to that very high standard, and is intended to be stacked with other funding like the co-investment fund, for example, or other sources of funding. So the new build funding is really there to get your project to a really high standard.
Great, thanks. So next question, do you consider initiatives related to waste generation management or reduction? What about water use or conservation, or just energy?
So the Sustainable Affordable Housing Initiative is just one of the funding programs that are operated by the Green Municipal Fund. The majority of we have 5 streams of funding. We have energy, waste, water, contaminated sites, brownfield, and transportation. The majority of the 5 streams of funding does go towards municipal initiatives. So there'll be municipal waste management initiatives where, for example, a municipality wants to bring about a new type of recycling collection. So we do that type of project, but usually at the scale of a municipality and usually in close collaboration with the municipal government. This particular stream of funding for affordable housing focuses on energy efficiency. So if you're interested in learning more about the funding that we have for waste, water, and other types of initiatives, you can definitely visit our website, fcm.ca/GMF, or Green Municipal Fund. Maybe I have to spell it out. But we do have funding for those types of initiatives, but they go generally more towards municipalities or those groups that work very, very closely with municipal governments to roll that out at a municipal scale.
The only thing I'd add to that is you could include some of those benefits, like as Ben mentioned previously, our funding covers the energy factors and other upgrades or retrofit needs in a building. So if there were energy conservation considerations or other considerations within your project, as long as it met the 25% reduction, they could certainly be included. And we didn't get into our evaluation criteria here, but we look at like primary benefits being energy use and GHG reductions. And then we look at kind of secondary environmental benefits that really run, the gamut of any kind of environmental benefit, including water conservation or green procurement processes, et cetera. All that information is in our application guide, but certainly encourage projects with other environmental considerations baked in addition to energy.
Great, thank you. Next question. How does the GMF definition of affordable as 80% of market median account for places with wildly unaffordable rental markets? Is it possible to tie affordable rent to income in the program criteria?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I would say our affordability criteria is kind of the baseline. So in the engagement that we did with the sector during the design, we heard that to simplify things and in consideration of the stacking of funds, having a similar entry point as the co-investment fund was important and helpful. And so that's why we used that 30% of the units at 80% of median market rents. But what we also did was limit, as Benjamin said, the eligible applicants to nonprofits, cooperatives, and municipal housing providers. And in doing so, I would say the majority of our applications to date have affordability that well exceeds the minimum standard criteria, many of which is tied to income. That bar is simply the bar to kind of enter the program.
Great, thanks, Jen. Next question. Are there plans to support projects that address energy poverty outside of affordable housing, such as retrofitting single-family homes?
We do have our Community Efficiency Financing Initiative, which is also run under the Green Municipal Fund. It's a really great program that, again, it works with municipalities, so works with your local government to enable them to run programs that can finance retrofits to single family homeowners. So we absolutely do recognize the role of energy, or the impact of energy poverty on people in all kinds of different living situations, whether they're in affordable rental, whether they're in market rental, whether they're in or private rental, or in even homeowners that are facing energy poverty in certain regions of the country. That is actually quite common. So through our community efficiency financing program, we are really excited to be making announcements about partnerships with different municipalities and regions that are interested in working on that, tackling it on a slightly more local level. So that's another program that had a $300 million budget commitment from the federal government through the Green Municipal Fund, and I encourage you to look it up. CEF is the abbreviation, and we're really excited to be making announcements about regional programs that are coming online, starting from around now and moving forward in the next couple of years.
Great, thanks, Ben. So we currently don't have any more questions. So Ben, Jen, Lindsay, were there any final notes that you wanted to end on? I think the presentation was pretty comprehensive, but Ben likes to talk, so we'll let him talk.
Oh, I do like to talk. I just noticed Yasmin's comment, and it's absolutely true, that financing is not always an option if you're already facing financial challenges. I will point out a couple other initiatives that aren't through FCM that are run under the National Housing Strategy. So the Canada Green Home Benefit Program, which I believe offers a $5,000 grant towards homeowners, qualifying homeowners who are interested in conducting energy retrofits. And there will soon be a zero interest loan program that has been announced. I believe it's been announced through the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, also for homeowners who qualify through that program. So there's a combination of loan and grant available to homeowners in particular through those programs. So I would say that there's action that's being taken. It's not always easy to address the needs of every individual household. Another really exciting thing that I see a lot in my work is provincial and utility benefits. A lot of utility companies have stepped up to say that lower income households qualify for different kinds of free upgrades to their homes. So there are a number of different initiatives that I think are out there to try to make energy more affordable for homes of different types. And I think that ours is just one in the mix, or the two programs that I've described are two in the mix of a number of initiatives that are coming available for energy poverty.
Great. Just to quickly respond to a couple points that were just posted in the chat. Contact information will be shared, and there will be a recording that's shared as well, along with copies of both the English and French slide decks. So on that note, I think it's a good time to wrap up today's presentation. That was great. I actually learned quite a bit from the three of you today. So thank you, Jen, Ben, and Lindsay, and thank you to everybody in the audience who tuned in today. Like I said, we're going to be following up with some additional information, including a post-webinar survey. So please be sure to let us know how you enjoyed today's webinar. And on that note, I'm going to sign off. I hope everybody takes care and stays safe.